if you constantly had 1.5 degrees warmer than you're meant to be, you're in a continual state of fever. That's how serious. Imagine living your entire life through having a fever all of the time. And we've got to achieve this by 2030. That's where the feeling is. It keeps chopping and changing, but it is absolutely about the here and the now. The point is that sedentary behaviours are unbelievably carbon intensive because of the amount of electricity and power we are actually using to be sedentary, whether that be through the food that we eat, just spending ages watching the television, through excessive driving. So sedentary behaviour and tackling it, and that's what we do all day, is a major tactic towards reducing carbon emissions. So it's about conscious leaders, and I'm not going to spend loads of time about what the concept is, but hopefully that slide there shows you it's this ability for us as leaders to share what we're thinking about it and getting others to embrace it. And the point about this is that I think part of the leader, you need a bit of humour in this. It is unbelievably scary and frightening, the whole thing about climate change. But we know from behaviour change models that if you go down that line, you don't change behaviour. So somehow we need to bring the power and the excitement of sport to help people to change their behaviours to act in. And I think we can do that through sport and humour. But it's also about, it's an energy crisis, about bringing our energy and our support to this. There are so many doom merchants at the moment going around that certainly about if being a climate conscious leader, let's tell a story that is about what can happen and make sure, as this picture is trying to show, that it's inclusive of lots of different people. It's not just people like ourselves who have an interest. We've got to bring those along who have yet to see the importance of this. And I think one of the other things of recognising as a leader is that our traditional model is that bit on the left that we've seen, and I'm deliberately saying it this way, that man, as in the male, sees them top of this sort of network across through nature, when what nature sees us as very much as on the right-hand side of that eco, that we're all equal, that there's this interconnection between all of us. And I think as well, we can use sport to begin to tell that story in a different way. And this is the only heavy text slide I'm going to be using today. But as I've thought about it, these are the four sort of statements that underpin me as a leader, trying to get to change people's thoughts and ideas about what's happening on the climate. The first thing is committing that this is about everyone, not just us as human beings. So often the debate is about we need to save ourselves as a species. No, it's about saving every living thing on the planet and doing that in a genuine way. It's that future concerns, future generations I'm able to enjoy today because of the actions of the people who've come before me. That it is a living thing, it's not an entity. And that final thing which sport has been, I think at times over, is that we can just take. We have to realise there's a limitation on what we can and can't do and move forward on that basis. So in one way, we have to be the voice for the planet, and that's great. And all of us as adults can do that. And we shouldn't be scared about what we can and can't do. Just say something. That's all that matters. But the journey so far has been very much described through the voices of adults, people like me. And we somehow need to bring lots of children and young people into this debate about sustainability in sport, because other people are going to be living here for the future and they've got some amazing ideas. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So how am I using as a leader? I'm using the term be active. And what this is a terminology to try and help me think of all of the different ways of doing it. So what does the BE stand for? Well, that stands for better earth, a better environment. And I'll now explain what the other 6 letters for. Okay. Is to acknowledge. So often this debate's about polar bears and they are struggling at the moment. But have we absolutely acknowledged the climate crisis within the organisations we lead or the organisations in which we can influence in terms of a sporting context? There's very few and little information about how sport and physical activity does this at a community level. Quite a lot at an elite level, but not at the community level. So we all need to step up our efforts there. Let's move on to the letter C. What this stands for is what can we change back in our place of work, in what we do on a daily basis. And there is so much that we can do. And it doesn't matter how little it is. It's just as leaders going with our colleagues, sharing with others. If you could do this, that's the recycling, as we all know, rethinking about how we travel, all of those things. And moving on to the letter T, the whole key thing here, this is the biggest health crisis we are ever going to face as a human species. And we have a critical role to play. I was listening to a conference where the head of the UK Health Security Agency was talking about, and he was explaining that there is a hot and a cold plan for the weather in the United Kingdom. And in both cases, the biggest killer is respiratory disease. And he said to that, the thing about this is there's no vaccine for that. The only way you can protect yourself as an individual from that is to have a better pair of lungs, and that comes from being physically active. So we have amazing opportunity to help tackle the health crisis that is around climate change. And we'll move on to I, about inequalities. It's so easy to see the flooding and everything as to somewhere in the South Pacific or the sub-Saharan desert or places like that. And they are feeling the effect of the actions that we've done over many years here in the West. But this whole issue of inequalities is also here now in the UK. And this picture is taken from a community. It's from not my side of the Pennines, your side of the Pennines. And as you can see, they're flooded. The way to solve these sort of issues is to have better green spaces that could hold back the water sufficiently that the properties. And it's those who are already facing the greatest inequalities that we're working with in sport that are facing the greatest effects of climate change. So inequality should be absolutely core at the work we're doing around climate change. We've got to make this visible. Today's Sport England strategy is great because it's absolutely putting at the core of it. But we tend at the moment just to do something on Earth Day or whatever. And if you can move on to the next slide, you'll see that the BBC, and this is what I think we need to be encouraging our organisations, in everything they absolutely do, they are now somehow or some way feeding in the message of environmental sustainability. So I don't know if you've noticed a number of police dramas, they're now using electric vehicles. Comedy series, they're showing it. We know it's on BBC Sport. Even EastEnders is talking about that. And I'm not sure who the guy up in the top left-hand corner is, but he seems to be doing a lot as well. And then finally, as this sort of giving a framework for us as a leaders, is the letter E. And I think again here is that it's unbelievably pessimistic at times, this whole thing about climate change. And when you read about the behaviour change, people are much more likely to act if they're enthused to act rather than to have this sort of terrible future that is. We know it's going to be tough. So how can we bring the excitement and the enthusiasm of sport to evoke the necessary action that needs to go forward? I use as a sort of framework in my mind of, if I'm doing those 6 things as a leader, then I'm making a contribution towards climate change and environmental sustainability. And hopefully you'll see it's something that's easy to explain to other people. So we've got uniting the movement. And what I want to try and show is that I think for all of us who are leaders or find ourselves in a position of leadership, that we need to make the connection between inequalities and climate change and start that shout and that promotion for it. So in uniting the movement, absolutely unbelievably strong about inequalities, but there was basically just half a page about environmental sustainability, how things have changed over the last 2 years. And you'll have seen in lots of things in the press, there's climate justice for all, we must do that. We're very proud in sport of what we've done in and around inequality. But we also need to recognise it's perhaps taken us 30 to 40 years to get where we are today, and we simply don't have that time in climate change. So what are the lessons from the inequalities debate? And yes, we've made lots of progress, but we know we've still got so much more to make, and we as leaders should be leading that charge. Is what can we do to learn from that to speed up the process we need? And perhaps one of the things which is quite we need to reflect on, that when I've gone looking at the unequal of climate change, there is lots from the world of arts, there's lots from the world of heritage, but there isn't a lot in the literature and the examples coming from sport and physical activity. So let's rethink about, as leaders, our work around inequalities and how do we describe that in a much more environmentally sustainable way and an enthusiastic way. And it's actually quite easy. This was a diagram I picked up from the United States, and really showing how physical activity, sport, and if you're facing inequalities, the linkage and why we need to make this connection work. The top bit across, and that's why some of the terminology is not quite what we would use in the UK. That's if you have all of those, you are at risk and facing inequalities. The hazards across the bottom then increase that risk by tenfold. And in the last year, we had all of those four things in a significant way here in the UK. So there's that clear connection between the groups that we're already working with, which are along the top of the in the white section, and the fact that climate change will make those inequalities greater. So what can we use to sport to pick on that? Well, I've got some ideas. Here's off the BBC website, and this shows you the temperature of built-up areas compared to green areas, and there can be a massing, a huge difference of up to 50% in temperatures. And the people that are facing the greatest inequalities largely live in those built-up areas and have the least access to the green space. And this was a neighbourhood up in Scotland from last year, and as you can see, the street on the left hand side doesn't really have any trees. The street 500 meters away does, and there was a 5 degrees C hotter difference between the two. So again, our work about creating green spaces and making sure those green spaces are a massive contribution to climate change and deals with the inequalities issue at the same time. But whilst those houses sort of look similar, that's not fair as well. That if you are from an ethnic minority background, almost 40% live in the least green space deprived areas. So again, all that work that we're trying to get through uniting the movement to create inequalities, let's think of it in an environmental sustainability way, because whether you've got a health condition, a disability, green spaces are vital, and that's how we can fight back on climate change. So don't believe me, I would absolutely recommend to you to listen to this YouTube by David Lammy, talking about what it was to be a young person in Tottenham in the 1970s, and how climate justice and racial justice and the value of physical activity all have such a great contribution together. So another thing about having a climate conscious leader is to think about that leaders often find themselves in a position where they are going to get challenged. I would argue that you're not a leader if you're not in a position where you're going to get challenged. And what these 6 pictures are trying to show is that there have been many times when very great and fantastic people have stood up to be as a leader and have used sport as the power to make that change and to make that statement. Those who are fighting climate change and wishing to make a change about climate change are increasingly using sport as a way of making that. I don't know if you saw last night, but in the Manchester Evening News, there was an article about how a group of environmentalists are targeting British Cycling for their sponsorship deal with Shell, and that went up on poster boards all over the city. Where are we going to see? We could get very upset by all of this, but actually I think it shows that sport is the medium that lots of these challenges are. So we need to stand up and work out our position in this, because I think what has been shown is that the people who've been protesting in the long term through using sport have been proven to be right. Which side of the fence are we going to be when climate change and sport has been used in this way? Now, these are some of the people, and the person down in the right-hand corner, there's a qualification to that person, but the other two are absolutely seen as massive leaders in the world of environmental sustainability and have made a huge contribution to the debate. The point about this slide for me is they're all actually called David, and they're all actually white, and they're all actually male, and they're all actually quite middle class. But if it's just about white middle class men, as much as their opinion matters, we are going to fail. So let's use the power of sport to bring in lots of different types of leaders, and it not just be white middle class men that are leading this debate, but that we can use the power of sport to bring in so many other voices to make the change and take it forward on that basis. So there is a bit of a breakout here. These are Olympians. They're all standing up now for climate change and environmental sustainability. And again, I'm going to be a bit tough here. There's not many older faces in that picture, is it? Because they're Olympians. And it is about elite sport. Where is the equivalent of this in community sport? We need to brigade ourselves now and get those voices. All of the work that we're doing around it, let's see if we can get all of those alternative voices, bringing them in, being community champions, not just for physical activity and sport, but explaining why walking and cycling, why green spaces, all these things are so important. That would be an amazing movement for the planet. It would massively help physical activity and sport to move forward, and we would see being as an inclusive organisation. And my final point about this, about leaders and understanding the linkage between physical activity and sport and the wider thing, is the very act of demonstrating about climate change is through the act of moving and is through the act of walking. There's that fundamental connection. We don't obviously see it because we get stuck by the banners. Now, am I going to go out on a march like something like that? Perhaps not for many others, but that's where we can use our everybody turning up to the community games each week, playing in the community. That's the way that we move. That's the way we create a movement, and then we can be seen to supporting wider initiatives like that. So it's bringing creative and thinking, and that's where we need, I think, as leaders to talk about this and bring it out into the front. So what might be this is understanding the agenda. I think as leaders, we need to do that. I fundamentally believe that we've got to connect that into climate justice. It links massively into uniting the movement. Can we make that? We've got to work out where our place is in the process. Some of us are never going to go on a march, some of us, but we can all help to make the change. I think absolutely also that my hope is that whenever Active Lancashire do something like this again, it won't be somebody like me doing the presentation. It will be another type of voice that's being heard. But we can all bring that enthusiasm and excitement to this debate. So I said I'd come back to young people. Well, here's the stat from the UK Climate Commission that 4 in 5 young people say the problem of climate change is important to them. If only that's what young people were saying about sport and physical activity, our jobs would nearly be complete, but they're not. So actually, perhaps climate change may be the way that we can engage more young people in sport and physical activity, because they've got some amazing creative ideas. I love this slide because this is how a group of young people in America redefined Halloween. Don't make it about ghouls, make it about the climate and all the changes. So again, part of, I think, a role as conscious leaders about climate change is how do we bring the voice of young people in and let that voice flourish and let that voice move forward without sort of going, well, that's rather good, well done. That's something we need to be thinking about in everything that we do. The fact of the matter is, the young people will be living their entire lives through a climate crisis. So we absolutely, I believe, should be there. And the fact, as we know, and Sport England showed that this morning, 120,000 football games have been cancelled over the last year because of the climate. I think one of the challenges is to get young people's voice up front and centre in the way that sport and physical activity is run in this country, and doing that through an environmentally sustainable way. So it's with that time to come to action now. So what might we do? Well, I've put this up. You've got a friend in me. Leadership can be incredibly lonely, whether you're the CEO of an organization or the manager of a team or wherever you find yourself in the structure, because obviously there's the concept of distributed leadership. Nobody knows how to solve this problem. So absolutely having those discussions and talking to each other. What do you think about this? Because actually you may just have discovered a great way to move things forward. So I think one of the key things of being a conscious climate leader is our ability to recognise who our friends are and to use our friends to help solve this. And isn't that what sport's all about at its very core? Moving on again. There's also loads and loads of stuff to help you on there if you go looking. I don't get any money for doing this, but Mike Berners-Lee, who's at the University of Lancaster, is one of the world's leading experts on climate change. He's published this fantastic book, and there's loads of examples in there about the carbon footprint and as it relates to physical activity. And one of the ones I really like is it's great going on a bicycle unless you've had a McDonald's, then you've lost all of the climate emissions about going on the bicycle. So he's got all of those creative little things. And by the way, bananas are good for you and climate friendly. They're also using this as a bit, there's lots of publicity out there, and there's something that's really quite common in all of this, is that if you look at the words along the bottom, physical activities there, it's walk. We're seen as part of the solution. We're seen, even if they perhaps haven't understood that we are. So the whole point is that there is a willingness, and I think we need to step up into our challenge. And I can perhaps better illustrate this with this next slide about what we need to be doing is, here I went to a conference and they put the slides up from everybody in the audience who'd been asked to vote on 11 things that you think are the best actions to reduce the amount of carbon. And as you can see from the people in the room, they put shift to cycle walking in the 9th position, when actually it's the second best way of reducing carbon emissions out of all of that list. And you look at some of the things. So even there's not that understanding, but we're there that can make that big contribution at a local level or in our governing body or in our active partnership, wherever that might be. So let's be proud of it and talk about it with confidence as a fantastic way. There's also this is called a SUD, which is a sustainable urban drainage device. And what this is all about is that flooding is one of our biggest things. So this is creating open space that just holds the water back enough. So it doesn't have to be these huge, awful things. There's lots of ways we can create small, creative, great green devices which hold back the water and allow us to be physically active. So it's not just about walking and cycling. We can change our environment for the better. It would be absolutely wrong when we're in Mental Health Week and all of the great work that we do in sport around that. And there's lots of leadership in this about the importance of mental health. What is massively moving is eco-anxiety. And I was reading around some research as well, that the biggest thing that destroys your mental health on a long-term basis, because you don't anticipate it, is flooding and your house being flooded and all of the awful things that lead on from there. So there is that thing of let's do those devices that reduces the risk of your flooding, but also tackling the worry and the around mental health around ego. And if you talk to the doctors, talk to UK Health Security Agency, OHID, etc., the best thing they can say is the most positive action is do something in the environment, go walking, plant something, be outside. That's the best way to do the eco action. That's what we're doing. So let's bring that into our leadership strategies. And this is the point here that, and I could have picked up loads and loads of these, everybody's climate action plan seems to have something to do about sport and physical activity, and yet when you read it, there's not the connections there. We need to be able to connect. The transport and land use is obviously one on this, the urban forest and open space is another one, the energy we can link into all those. So it's actually for us to explain as leaders to others. It's not that they're trying to exclude us, we just need to make that connection from them. If we could do that, we'd massively move forward the whole debate, because we're ready and willing to help the mitigation from climate change. Now, I did say about the ability of bringing humour and excitement and into this. So this guy had this bright idea of, I'm going to look at the football clubs and do some interesting t-shirts around environmental sustainability. And here's a little bit of homework for you. When you've left today, go and have a look how many football clubs either have a nickname related to something in nature, or that's in their logo as well. There's a big connection here. The point about this linking up with Hull City was, and they've now developed this relationship in with the World Wildlife Fund, is to make the connection about tigers in the wild, and they could all be lost by 2070. The next one I am going to put a bit of a health warning on, because I am a Derby County supporter. As far as I'm concerned, forest can burn. But the point about this is that even that isn't that a creative way of doing it, and brings it home. And my whole point again here, as a Derby fan, which is the Rams, there you go, connection to nature and with forest, this is something we can have a good chat about and actually join together on, rather than our traditional library. So think about that humour, and think about using sport in a creative way to do it. So my final bit before we move into what Sport England have talked about today is, I've just encouraged you, if there's one thing you can do as a leader, and about is just make that commitment to have the conversations. When Beth rang me up to do this, that's why I wanted to do it. Whether it's any good or not, it doesn't really matter. We're having the conversation. I hope that it's been of some use to this morning. Okay, let's go through the Sport England strategy then. It's Chris Ballman, who is the absolute chair of this, massive champion. The reason why it's called Every Move is because absolutely everything that Sport England is now going to do is through that sustainability lens, and that's what they want to see in the system as a whole. And I would thoroughly encourage you to go on the, that's okay, go onto the website. There's a fantastic little 2-minute video to explain it. This is what's at the core of the strategy, and hopefully this has come through this morning as well, that yes, uniting the movement was about participation, and it was about inequalities. What shifted over the last 2 years is what binds those two things together is climate change. And therefore we need to look at it in the round of those three things as we set about as leaders to get the nation physically active. Here's the outline of the strategy, and I'm not going to go through this in any great detail because it's published on the Sport England website. What I am going to do though is to come down to some of those priority themes and levers for change over the next 4 slides that they're looking for us as a sector to deal with and for us to give leadership on. So this is about this support and capability building. What they're very much looking for is the creation of coalitions, and that could be at national level, a local level, a community level. They're going to set out to create more tools and resources. If you've seen the Bubble resource, that's great, deliver training, and courses like the Climate Fresh. So there's going to be lots of help and support there. My fear is that if we as leaders are not championing this, it will just get put on the shelf. So the plea from people, from me, and I know from Sport England, is let's get this information out as far and as wide as we possibly can. And that's always what went slow with the inequalities. It was there, but there was never the pressure to do it at the speed that it was required. Let's not make that mistake again with environmental sustainability. So the second of the areas, moving on, is about leveraging their investment. There is going to be something in sports governance, and ourselves as leaders will know all about that, but they're very clear that it's going to be proportionate to a club level to the big organisations. And But here's the key point and why we need to get rid of it. By 2027, if anyone who is a significant funded partner of Sport England will have to have a substantial environmental sustainability plan in place and showing that the action they talk about enabling and requiring people to do. But what can we do today? The Movement Fund is out there. It's the first time there's an explicit mention about environmental sustainability, a brilliant way to support our local clubs and communities to do something now in anticipation of some of the other things on that list happening. So I'd encourage you to find out the Movement Fund and get your organisations implying into that. And what I should also say is the singles thing has been about flooding. Anyway, let's move on to advocacy. Massive amount of work to go in around this, awareness raising activities, the visuals. Again, please go on the website. There's a great little video, which is a way to share. You'll see they massively put the thing about climate injustice in there. And as hopefully it's come out this morning, this whole thing about thought leadership, the answers are within us as a group. And then the final one on the thing is this connections into the natural and built environment. That's what's been missing out the strategies. It's almost like we as sport have been doing something over here and not realizing our contribution in the natural world. So what do AGPs mean? It's artificial grass pitches. Is that the massive shift away from that rubber infill? And I'm again not going to go through all of the items because the presentation was shared afterwards. But that building resilience to climate change, and that comes back to this value of the green spaces, the value of our built structures to reduce carbon emissions, but also make us secure for the future. So what might 2050 be like? That's how they're anticipating it will be these 4 areas of zero carbon and climate resilience, nature's thriving, lots of community hubs in place, and active design has become the norm.